Do you guys want to give another minute or two before getting started?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Just a minute or two. About how
Okay.
many do we have on currently? Like 5 or 6.
Where is everybody?
Actually, there's a total of 11.
Oh,
And
great.
if you click on participants, you have to switch back and forth between panelists and attendees.
Awesome. Learned something new about navigating.
And I would say too, just knowing how some things are going right now, I would say that people are probably on a call and they're getting ready to end and hopping on in just a second. So we'll give them another minute and then we'll get started.
Sounds good.
Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started just to be cognizant of everybody's time today. So I want to say good afternoon and welcome. Thanks for attending the Idaho Nonprofit Center's webinar today on hosting a virtual board meeting. As we know that during the time of everyone working remotely and we're trying to be engaging with our board meetings and with our board members, we thought that this would be a great topic, just kind of about, the do's and don'ts of hosting a board meeting, but also the do's and don'ts of like working virtually as well. So I'm Carrie Davidson. I'm the Vice President of Membership and Development for the Idaho Nonprofit Center. And I want to say welcome to all of our friends and to all of our partners that are out there. We're happy to be hosting today with Deanna Rolfs and Mark Vincent from the Design Group International. They support leaders in personal, team, and organizational transformation. So I'm not going to read their bios today, but we are super thankful to have them with us today. Deanna's working from home in Michigan, and Mark is one of the founders of Design Group International, and he works here in Boise. So welcome to you both, and we are very glad to have you guys here today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Carrie. And hello to everyone. I can see your names and some of you a picture, which is great. I'm Deanna Rolfs, and Mark and I are super excited to spend this next bit of time with you. So let's go to the next slide, and I'll just walk you through how we're going to spend the next 50 minutes together. We are going to start with welcome, of course. Thanks for doing that so well, Carrie. And then we will do some introductions. Mark and I will introduce ourselves to you a bit, and then we're going to try to have you unmute and introduce yourselves to the group as well. We're going to talk a little bit about the challenge that we're running into and why we're here to talk about virtual board meetings. We will talk about some of the strategies for effective board meetings, share some pitfalls that are quite typical, whether you've run into them or not. Hopefully we can prevent you from doing those if you have not, and then just share some of the best practices as well. So we will definitely end on time, and we are really looking forward to spending the next bit of time with you. Okay, next slide, please. So Mark and I are going to spend a moment here and introduce ourselves to you. I'll go first, then Mark will go, and then we'll ask you to unmute yourselves and share your name, the organization you lead in. One of your roles or identities, parent and neighbor, on anything that is you'd like to share about yourself. and one thing that brings you joy. So we have about 10 attendees on, so you'll have a good, 20, 30 seconds to share one of those things. I have to admit that one of the most difficult parts about webinars for me is that I can't see all of your faces. It feels kind of like talking into a well, but that's the point. So it's really great, and we appreciate hearing a little bit from you at the beginning of the webinar. So I'll introduce myself to you first. I serve as a strategist, a facilitator, a coach, a systems thinker, a consultant. I support leaders in personal, team, and organizational transformation. So I serve as a senior consultant with a community of practice called Design Group International, of which Mark is the founder, and he will tell you a bit about that. But we have been a virtual organization since 2000. So our design, our organization, our community of practice was built around this method of virtual interaction. So what unites us at Design Group is our method of process consulting. We walk alongside leaders and their teams, supporting them in change and transformation. So we do that by listening and helping and learning and supporting leaders to a vibrant future. So my why is that I believe leaders are creative and resourceful and whole. I believe that leadership is a challenge, a special calling, and I believe that it can be lonely. So I really enjoy supporting leaders, having served in executive leadership roles in national, regional, and local nonprofits. I love helping folks solve their naughtiest challenges, including how to go virtual with board meetings. So I also worked remotely for a little bit more than 4 years with a nonprofit out of San Francisco, and I lived here in the Midwest the whole time. So I love virtual engagement. I think that it can totally work, and there are definitely some challenges with it. So, but success takes intentionality is what I found. So I'm excited to engage with all of you, get to know you, and support you in the middle of this pandemic situation. And lastly, one of the things that brings me joy is seeing my kiddos play. We have a 12-year-old and an 8-year-old. We got some new porch furniture, and I just left the living room not even 10 minutes ago, and they are all like huddled in the living room. They each have their own like little box with like a book, and they're reading. And it's a joy to celebrate joy in the midst of this time, because life does not stop. So I'd like to hand it over to Mark.
I'll be real quick about this. My name is Mark Vincent. I live up in Wilderness Ranch, and I've been living here physically and virtually for the last couple of months, like most of you have, where you're doing a whole lot of things out of your home. And I was very grateful to have had a long and strong background in doing things virtually because it just didn't feel like I was doing a whole lot different and could be supportive to many people who were doing things very, very differently. I spend a lot of time now that I am in the founder's role for this company or this community of practice with owners, with executive directors, with the boards and the C-suite, when they're really trying to figure out how to deal with things, both opportunities and challenges in their unique context. And often the conversation for me anymore is with leaders who get it, they've succeeded, they've risen to the top of their game, but they know they've got to get better. And it's no longer about the curriculum they've gone through, it's about the curriculum that nobody's written yet, it's the unique part of their context. They've got to really kind of get to what we might call maestro level of what they do. And I really get to enjoy that. And that's where I think I'll just report a big piece of joy for me, is when in those conversations, there is an aha. Like, okay, I'm back to learning again instead of trading off of my expertise, because expertise usually only helps you manage current value, whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit. What you don't know and what you have yet to master is usually where all the future value comes from. And for you to be doing what you do in 5 or 8 or 10 years, it's about the future value. So that's the space I get to live in, and I get a lot of joy there.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. So now we'd like to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself, your name, the organization you represent here today, and your role there or elsewhere, and one thing that brings you joy.
Should we maybe do this just by calling on people, like 2 at a time? Like if we said Evan and then Aranza or something like that?
That sounds great.
Can we start with you, Evan, and then we'll go to Aranza?
Of course. My name is Evan Bask. I am the Programs and Events Manager here at the Idaho Nonprofit Center. One of my roles or identities, I've really been enjoying running. So I would say I'm a runner lately. On the green belt, I live pretty close, so that's been nice. What brings me joy is the good weather outside and being able to enjoy the outdoors and the sun and the warmth.
That's great. And that's a great example of probably the pace we need to keep here. And if I mispronounce a name, I apologize. How about Aranza and then Amanda?
My name is Aranza Zabala. I am Vice President of the Board of Directors for the Teton Regional Land Trust. I am retired, and so as a result, I get to spend time with the things that bring me joy, my family, and in the mountains. And just to add, it brings me joy when people take on pronouncing my name and do it right. So thank you, Mark.
Well, I'm pretty sure I didn't get the Z part of it right, but hey, I gave it a try. And what a beautiful name. Let's go to Amanda and then Janie.
Hey, I'm Amanda. I am with the Northwest Abortion Access Fund. We cover Alaska, Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. I'm located in Idaho, and I am a board member on the fund. And what brings me joy is my cat.
Okay. Janie and then Stuart.
So I'm Janie Best. I'm the president and CEO of Make-A-Wish Idaho. One of my secret identities is I am a barbershop singer, 4-part harmony. And what's currently bringing me joy is being a dog mom. That look of total adoration, I can't do anything without you, that I don't get from my older children anymore.
Hey, it's great. We've got cat people and dog people on this workshop. That's super. Stuart and then Nora. Stuart isn't coming off of mute. We'll try and come back to that. Nora, let's do you. And then Jocelyn.
Good afternoon. Nora Carpenter, President and CEO of United Way, Treasure Valley, located in Boise. One of my roles and identities at this time of the year is gardener. I'm enjoying, except for a very rainy day like today, I'm really enjoying the rebirth of the soil and all that it brings with us. And what is bringing me joy in addition to gardening right at the moment is in our work during this pandemic time, helping to identify very unlikely partners and helping individuals and organizations discover mutual connections and the ability to lift and help together in ways they never imagined.
Thank you. Jocelyn and then Pamela. Not hearing Jocelyn. Let's go Pamela and then John.
Hi, I'm Pam Laughlin, and I'm with the Idaho Fish and Wildlife Foundation. I'm their financial specialist. And one of my roles and identities is only child of an aging parent. So taking care of her at this time, even though she's more taking care of me. And what brings me joy is being out in nature and the fresh air. It just revitalizes my spirit at this time.
Thank you. John Nidro, and then we'll go to Philip.
Hello, my name is John Nedrow. I'm president of the board of the Teton Regional Land Trust. I'm a semi-retired farmer, live in Ashton, Idaho. Some things that bring me joy are the outdoors and my grandchildren. Some things that will bring me joy is being able to have meetings in person and going to get a haircut.
Very good. Philip, and then we'll end with Anne, and then we'll turn it back to you, Deanna.
Hi, I'm Philip Huff, Executive Director of the Friends of Scotchin Peaks Wilderness. I also sit as a volunteer on the board or advisory council of several other organizations for Idaho, the Idaho Trails Association being one. What brings me joy professionally right now is we have found ways to enhance our community connections even during this time of working at home. What brings me joy personally is springtime. I've gotten the garden in and trails are opening up.
Sure, great, thank you. Anne, bring us home.
I will bring you home. I'm Ann Johnson, Executive Director of Orchard Ridge Senior Living, providing homes for seniors, whether it's affordable housing or assisted living and memory care. I think my role right now, I am the self-care proclaimer of how important it is, especially for my staff here. We're on the front lines and trying to take care of ourselves while being caregivers is a challenge. What brings me joy is collaborative problem solving, to present a problem and then let my team try to come up with some solutions. And I find that very gratifying.
Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. And I think Stuart, he typed in his response. He wasn't able to speak in verbally, right? Okay, so Stuart shared that he is currently locked out of his microphone. He's a retired firefighter, vice chair for Chatco Lab, the Northwest Leadership Lab. And what brings him joy is laughter. So thank you all very much. Let's do a double check, make sure we didn't miss anybody. Okay.
Jocelyn has put hers into the chat box as well.
Oh, fabulous. Jocelyn Matkins is an ED and she's on several boards. Thank you, Jocelyn. So let's go to the next slide. It always helps just to name the challenge we're running into, right? Many of us in our personal and professional lives are running into many sharp pivots right now. We are having to shift super quickly, and virtual board meetings are no different. So they can be a real challenge. Change is hard, so it takes, and leadership takes intentionality. So we are definitely here because of COVID, right? It has pushed some of us and many of us to working remotely, working virtually, whether it's via phone or meetings such as this. So we are really looking forward to connecting and naming challenges and supporting one another today. That's why we took 10 minutes out of our agenda, so you can introduce yourselves as well. You can network with each other after this if you don't already. So there's a bit of a story I want to share in introduction as we think about the challenge, and it has to do with that graphic that I put there on the right by David Kessler. It's a quote, and I will read it. He wrote, "You don't have to experience grief, but you can only avoid it by avoiding love. Love and grief are inextricably intertwined." So I recently, actually just yesterday morning, listened to Brene Brown's podcast. It's called Unlocking Us, and she interviewed David Kessler. And he recently wrote a book in regard to stages of grief. You may have heard of the 5 stages of grief, but he has proposed that there's another one, and that's finding meaning. So there's a bit of his story that I'd like to repeat for you now. He was talking about how in this stage of COVID-19 and a worldwide pandemic, we are all dealing with grief and loss of the world that we once knew. And that world that we are accustomed to is gone. This is grief, and grief is the death of something. So we're all trying to find new ways to hold each other's hands, to walk beside each other virtually. We know this won't be forever, and we know that we will get through this. So I find much comfort in this, as I feel like there are so many things that we're grieving and trying to, I heard again on public radio that our brains are not wired to not know what's coming in 2 months. And that causes a lot of stress and a lot of grief. So that's true. It's the challenge here today. So I'm hoping that this can be a bit of a respite and a place that we can learn from and with each other. So let's go to the next slide, please. These are our topics we're going to be talking about today. We're going to set the stage a bit first. In regard to, before you think anything about technology and tips and tricks and pitfalls and all of that, we propose that connecting to your board members and to your mission and connecting to each other as humans is the very first place to start. So I loved what I heard in one of your introductions about a self-proclaimed self-care proclaimer, right? So we totally support that. It's really important that we see each other and really connect each other to each other. We then will talk about some tips and some pitfalls, and we'll talk a little bit about stress management. So let's dive in together. Next slide, please. Okay, so first of all, this is the slide where we encourage you to take a deep breath. Wherever you're sitting, wherever you're standing, take a couple of deep breaths here. And we ask you to reflect upon your organization's mission. Just think about that mission, what it brings to mind, what you see, what you hear, what you feel. And think a moment about your personal why. Why are you in the board leadership role you're in? Why are you in the executive leadership role you're in? What called you to this work, living out this mission? Feel free to grab a pen or just stay in this moment thinking about what that feels like and looks like. And now I'm going to ask you to shift to thinking about your board members or your fellow board members, because I know a couple of you are board members. Why did you, or why did your fellow board members, why did the board members that lead your organization, why did they join? Feel free to take just a moment and type an idea, a response to that in the chat. I don't think we'll read all of them. Grounding and taking a moment to ground in our why and why our organizations exist and why our calling intersects with this organization and why our board members are there are really an important place to start. I'll take just 5-10 seconds here. If you're willing to type one of those whys in the chat, that would be great. So I'm seeing responses around connecting, being involved in a topic that you're passionate about. And we know there are a lot of other important whys as well. So as you're typing those in or writing or thinking about yours, we ask you to shift to think about and vision a successful virtual board member experience. How would you like or envision your board members to experience that? We encourage you in this exercise, this visioning, to think and imagine with both left and right brain, whichever is your affinity, maybe start there. If you think about boards achieving work and accomplishing tasks and doing really hard, great work together, fabulous. You think about the human connections of your board and the ways that they engage and support your organization to live out its mission. So I see another chat. Nora shared, board members want to physically and emotionally be a part of something bigger than themselves. Yeah, contribute to something bigger than ourselves. So in this deep breath moment and visioning, Mark and I want to remind you that you lead board culture. You are the leaders that bring people together around the why. You know why you recruited each of them. You know why you said yes to each of them, whatever that process was. Board members do, as Philip just said, want to feel like their participation accomplishes something, right? And they're a part of something bigger than themselves. Great, so let's go to the next slide. And we're going to make a transition here to that visioning. Maybe think of that as where you're headed, right? As you lead that board culture, we want that to be the bedrock under your feet, and we want that to be where you're headed. So think about that as we dive into some details here.
Deanna, just one really quick comment is that
Please.
what you just did may be the most important thing you do in a virtual board meeting, just like it would be the most important thing you would do in a physical board meeting. If you don't anchor in the why and you don't take the time to anchor in the why, then you're in everybody's individual head and subjective experience. What's happened to them that day, you're not in the same place. And when you're virtual, as you were saying, you just got to get in the same place and be working to govern the same organization in the same moment. So it's a way to bring you into that space, and you can't take a shortcut for that. Even though your body might scream like, hey, we got to get on with this stuff. You take a shortcut, you won't all be having the same conversation. And that means you'll have to have that as an agenda item again the next time to clarify the conversation from before, and that wastes time and money.
Thank you, Mark. As you mentioned that, it makes me think how much more important this is during the time of COVID-19, right? Yes. Our brains we're panicking, we're afraid, we're grieving, we're not sure. And it's even more important, even if you normally do that, especially now. And feel free to snag some of those questions from that slide and utilize them in your board meetings. Great, so our next slide is around tips. With tips and pitfalls. So Mark and I are going to start here by sharing how we've adjusted, just one example of how we've adjusted since COVID-19 in the last couple of months. And we'll each share one best practice that we've observed. And then we'll give you a moment to type in the chat or share verbally if that works too. You can pop right in. What has been one of your biggest challenges in this time as you think about shifting or utilizing already? Some of you may have already utilized virtual board meetings. So I'll start and then have Mark share. So I would like to share, as Mark and I were running through this, he said, what has been your biggest challenge? Or how have you adjusted? And I shared with him, and then I said, I don't know, that feels too vulnerable. That might feel too vulnerable to share. And he said, that's exactly why you should share it. So I am. So I am, at the time, at the beginning March, I was about 2 months into full-time consulting. I've done consulting for organizations and been a part of Design Group, working in a full-time executive leadership role for a long time. But just 2 months in to full-time consulting, this happened. I had a full-time caseload, and within 4 weeks, many of my clients had to make, or a couple of them anyway, had to make some hard decisions. And I worried that my hopes and my dreams and my livelihood were slipping through my fingers. So it really became quite an existential question. Did I make a mistake in my career? Who am I to do this work? Can I really do this during the time of COVID? Can I make the pivots I need to make? So these weren't necessarily questions of my expertise or my capability, because I've done that all through my career as walk alongside leaders. But in a new situation, it pulled the rug right out from under me. So I would lie awake and I would question my place in the world. How can I contribute now? What does this look like? What does the future look like? So adjusting, and it's not all in a nice, neat little bow right now, but I am noticing that I kept doing what I do well, which is walk alongside leaders, and have many new projects lined up and already starting. So that it doesn't have to end that way though. The point is adjusting my mindsets, adjusting what success looks like to me, and not losing my why, which was serving and walking alongside leaders through relationships. So it sounds so nice and neat in a bow, but it was messy, friends. That's hard work, especially when there are existential questions about what we, why we're here and what we're doing to contribute. And as I've been brave enough to share that, I also believe in vulnerability. And when we model vulnerability, we also model strength. So I think that leads to a couple of the best practices I've observed. I think when in doubt, especially around technology, or especially around something you're learning, having worked almost my whole career in adult learning, practice. We'll talk about this in a little bit more detail later, give you some ideas. but that practicing helps you decrease some of your anxiety if you have it. If you don't, great. But it helps us to not lose sight of that big vision, that big goal, our big why. All right, hand it over to you, Mark.
I'll be real quick here. Basically, just the big adjustment for me has been pretty easy to describe. This kind of attention you have to give in a meeting like this, especially if you've got a dozen people in little tiny boxes and pictures and you're trying to talk with them, it requires a unique form of concentration, much more akin to a difficult conversation. Even though it's not a difficult one necessarily, it's just you're zeroed in like this. And so the time to recover after before you go into another one matters. So early on, just because of the frequency of these and the number I might be doing in a day, to allow for the 10 to 15 minutes before another one starts, instead of going back to back to back to back, so that you can walk around, you can actually go lay down, you can close your eyes for a couple of minutes, you can do something other than just work and do a brain concentration kind of a task. Helps to set a rhythm if you're doing this. Like if you have a staff to supervise and you're going to be going in 5 or 6 meetings like this a day, it's a different pace because there's no water cooler. There's no informal hallway conversations and that kind of thing. A best practice would be the logging on early, a couple of minutes, getting yourself set. And again, that like 10 to 15 minute break allows for that. And then allowing the people you're meeting with, just giving permission to move your body, to stand up, to be a little bit outside the picture, to do some things so you're not so rigid and so tight. And again, that works against fatigue. Keeps it real, keeps us human, much like we'd be if we were around a conference table together and you turn and talk to your neighbor. Related to that is anybody who starts to forbid chat kinds of things, private chats, whatever, they're turning into a Nazi. And that's not going to be helpful, because people need informal as well as formal interactivity in order to be able to concentrate on the task at hand.
Awesome, thank you. Carrie, could you go back just one slide a quick second? Thanks, perfect. So we're wondering now if we could take a couple of moments or minutes and have you share in the chat a couple of your biggest challenges, or just one if there's a big one, something that caused you to come to this meeting and say, oh man, I'm not sure about that. This gives Mark and I an idea of whether we're hitting the mark with some of the suggestions we've pre-prepared and that we run into, and it also allows you to support each other. So building more of a 1 hour community right here. All right, feel free to enter and type any challenges you're running into in the chat.
Yeah, we can circle back to them for sure.
Yeah, let's do that. So let's go to the next slide. Let's talk about pitfalls. So we've talked about a couple of these, but I'm just going to run through them. Here, I'll read them. Some of the pitfalls that we've noticed and experienced in supporting leaders and nonprofit teams and boards are, as Mark mentioned, not logging in early. So make sure you schedule some time, especially if you're facilitating or you're kicking it off. Not scheduling margin between meetings, as also Mark mentioned, can be really difficult. Giving yourself a little brain break. This was something my 3rd week into COVID, I was like, why can I not handle 9 back-to-back meetings like I could in the past? Like, duh, this is just a completely different environment besides the stress that's going on for all of us. Speaking of stress, very easy pitfall is not being fully present. We can think about, especially when we're on our computers, maybe not if you're leading the part of the meeting, but if you're stepping back and handing it to the board president to do some speaking, etc., it can be really tempting to just grab the phone quick a minute or hop on that email real quick. And especially during this, just really recommend that you be there, be in the moment. We have seen a pitfall, which is not sending all documents ahead of time. So that can just be really hard for people to jump right in if whether they're board members that meticulously read through everything or they're board members that skim it really quickly, right? A best practice is to send it ahead of time, send all the documents they need. And really more than just 24 hours if you can, especially if there are some big decisions going on, so they can be thoughtful about that.
It's good to recognize here that the basic best practices for governance are not lessened and may even be heightened in some ways. So some things will be harder, some things will be easier, but the basic stuff that we would normally do to govern well, they're still what we would do.
And then lastly, whether or not you are a person that is aware of or struggles with anxiety, which is many millions of people, a quick story, ensuring that you're relaxed and non-anxious is super important to come into these meetings. So one of my friends who's a therapist, her husband works for our local transit organization. And just a week and a half into this, he was working about 12-hour days. You know, they're making many pivots and really hard decisions. And she said to him, oh, he said, I can't sleep. I'm really worried all the time. She said, yeah, you're experiencing, that's some anxiety. That he's like, no, I don't have anxiety. And he was thinking panic attacks, you know, but anxiety is, we are all facing anxiety. So to remember that is normal, and to find your center place, whatever that is for you, right? Walk around the block, quick a moment, do the power stance. I was teaching my children power stance. Really great research on that before you go into a meeting to be your most relaxed, non-anxious self. Those are some of the pitfalls that we have seen. So let's take a quick moment and skim the chat just to see if there's anything here.
And I was just noting that there's a setting where you can post to all panelists or all panelists and attendees, and we're getting some of both. So you and I are seeing everything, and some are seeing only some. There's one thing I think I could pick up on while you skim through this, Deanna, just to see if there's any further response you'd like to have. There are a couple of things that can be done for maximizing participation. And you experienced one of those as we started, where I just began to say, okay, so we're all going to introduce, Deanna said everybody's going to introduce themselves. And I just then began to say, okay, so let's start with Evan and let's move to Aranza. And so you know it's coming to you. You're also hearing there's a modality here where everybody's going to say something. You have to say a lot. I've even seen it said, hey, if you're not ready, just say pass, go to the next person. And that non-anxiousness about that kind of facilitation, we're all going to participate, no big deal, and you just go, really helps. One other thing that's very specific to a virtual meeting like this are the three roles. There is the chair role, there is the facilitative role, and there's the technologist's role. And if you can have those be separated for a virtual meeting, it's really helpful so that everybody can really be present. And you don't have somebody trying to host and as a technologist and facilitate the meeting. If you can only separate two of those roles, then you would want the chair or facilitator to be one and a technologist to be another, much like Deanna and I are trading off here. And if you can't make that happen, because like you're the only person that has any confidence, the only person who will do it, then getting on early, making sure you're set up, having open settings for everybody so you're not having to do a lot of, let me turn you on, let me shut you down, that kind of stuff will really help. So those are ways that can maximize participation, but at the heart is that non-anxiety. And hey, we're going to participate and we'll take our time. That makes all the difference. So there may be other things, Deanna, that you were noting that you wanted to respond to.
Yeah, there are some really great things that you all are sharing here. So I'm going to touch on a couple of them, and then we'll do a double check before we close out to make sure we've talked about these. So Nora mentioned the challenges of shy or quiet members, getting them to engage virtually. I think Mark just mentioned a couple of those. So, hey, we're going to go around and having everyone have their video on so we can see each other and look at each other the same way we could if we were in a room are just a couple of ideas there. Phil mentioned that his board includes 4 new members. So that relationship building stage is really important to ensure that it's still being done virtually. So whether that's a couple of prompts to get people to share, whether that's modifying an agenda to create a little more space at the beginning for people to talk and engage as humans, as people, so that they know how to best engage as board members. Looks like, not talking. That's one that Mark mentioned earlier as well. And
I'd add
suggested
one
a
in
couple.
here. It depends on your license and it depends on what you're using, but some like Zoom, and it depends on the license you have, allow for breakouts. And that's a very easy function. You can do it random, you can pre-assign them so that, hey, for the next 10 minutes, you're gonna be in groups of 3, here's the question. You can always provide those questions in advance as a part of the meeting so that somebody who needs time to think before they can express themselves out loud would actually have that time and feel safe. I'm also aware of a number of groups, and Deanna, I would think you've experienced this also, where they actually begin to split the time. So instead of one long board meeting, they have 2 across 2 weeks or something, and they might work a social time, just gather around, get your cup of coffee or whatever, and let's just talk for 45 minutes and be humans together so that when we're doing the work, we're doing the work at the subsequent meeting.
Thank you. I love that. Pamela shared, it's hard for a board that's used to being face-to-face, where about half embrace the technology and half don't. And then John also mentioned where there's some lag between conversations. And it does really make me think about, if those that aren't comfortable with technology, you could offer to the board to say, hey, I'll meet with you a half hour early, or we'll have this other meeting where it'll be more of a social time, but we'll try out how do you mute and unmute yourself? How do you open up chat? How do you, share your video and not, so that they can gain comfortability in that, and it's not a barrier once they do jump into the board meeting. Okay, go ahead.
I was just thinking it's something that's going to connect here. I've been running across this multiple places, that this is going on long enough that this will now be a part of our lives, even if it wasn't before. So if a person who is very ardent about meeting face-to-face and still wants to and never will connect, the meetings that they are a part of will have connection, because there'll be a board member who's saying, now, why should I drive 2 hours for this? I'll do that 3 times a year. I'm not going to do it 12 times a year. It'll save gas money. That means I can donate more to the organization. You'll get all that kind of thing going. So working this in some way in a hybrid form is very likely to be a part of your future from here, no matter how opened up things become.
Awesome. Let's go to the next slide, which are some of the tips. So let's run through these. And again, some of them we probably already mentioned. Run through the list here. So know your software, whether that looks like logging in early, making sure people know, and you especially, and participants know how to navigate the chat and how to slide the windows so they can see a presentation while they see others' faces, how they raise their hands, because there's a digital in some, or give a thumbs up. Breakout rooms, Mark mentioned. I was, in my head a couple weeks ago, I was getting Zoom Teams and Zoom breakouts mixed up, thinking that there was an increased cost, but breakouts are included in the basic Zoom membership, and they're quite easy to do. So if you need to have people break out, either you can identify which people go into which groups, you can identify how long they meet, you can identify the size of the groups. I did it made it happen rather than participating. So you can totally do it. The second tip is practice, practice, practice. So even then, tools may not work, just roll with it, right? The grace and this is being centered. So I have a quick example. Yesterday, I was facilitating a group of about 30 women with a Michigan governor's group. And I was playing more than one of those roles that Mark mentioned. So again, I'm learning too. And afterwards I was like, I'm never doing that again. I facilitated most of the slides. I also managed breakout groups, and I navigated like a video, and I showed a video and the sound wasn't working. So we all sat there for 3 or 4 minutes and watched the video. Thank goodness the sound wasn't necessary for the point of the video, but I'm like, oh man, I practiced it like 6 times beforehand and it still didn't work. So just made a joke and, you know, the content was still there, and just rolled with it. So practice, practice, practice. And don't be afraid, even in a meeting, to say, hey, I did practice this, but this isn't going as I'd expected, right? Sometimes just making a joke about it, or however you and your leadership handle that, rather than being perfectionist. Now is a time where people are extending so much grace. So it's a time to just not beat yourself up about it. Next, we mentioned this earlier, but we recommend that you infuse the meeting with left and right brain practices. So maybe you don't always do that in a meeting. Maybe you do. Totally depends on the culture of your board. But to include the creative and the planning with the concrete and the playful. One of the warm-ups I saw an executive director use a couple weeks ago was, what's one of the best jokes or the silliest moments where you're like, I never thought I would be doing this? And we laughed so hard. And it was a really great way just to see each other as people. They were all completely appropriate. You know, it was really a great way to start a meeting with some really positive energy. The next point is that we recommend you share before, share during, and share after. So what we mean by that is send documents early via email, share links in chat during a meeting, over communicate. It is a time where people may need to be reminded, oh, hey, you're on mute, right? Unmute yourself. Yesterday, I was in a meeting where we started and people were rolling in, you know, and we were waiting for about 30 or 40 people. And I had created a link to all of the documents because this group hadn't met prior to this. And I chatted it. And then as people were coming in, they couldn't find it. So it was this hilarious moment of like share and share again and share again, because then someone joined the meeting an hour later and they're like, where are the documents you're talking about? You know, and they just shared it in chat and other members copied and pasted it, or then someone couldn't get the copy and paste to open up in their browser. So it's just par for the course. It doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. Keep over communicate.
Everyone will have a different technological array to at their end. So their iPad and computer, or their just phone, smartphone, they've got 5 screens because they're really tech savvy or whatever else. And so the getting things to people ahead of time, having them available during, sending them out after are ways to make sure, as you were saying, Deanna, that everybody's got it and they can quickly get at it and not just be dependent on you to send it right in the middle of the meeting yet again. And I love the idea. It's going to be a takeaway from me to put the links right in a chat window. Scroll up, it'll be right at the top there. You can open it up. That's a great one.
The next tip we have is use variety of methods during the meeting. So you aren't the only one, or the board president isn't the only one talking into a well during that conversation. It can look like, as we've already talked about, using and modeled here, using the chat, having people rotate speakers, call on people by name, encourage participation in different ways so it mixes up the meeting, right? It's not just droning on, not that any of you would be that, but it's just important because it helps our brains shift and really stay engaged during a meeting. We do recommend that you create or revisit meeting norms. Some boards may not have them written, some may. Maybe it's a Robert's Rules type group toward board. Maybe you really value the contribution of each member. Maybe you normally over communicate. Maybe you have norms for handling conflict or disagreement, or maybe you don't. But this is a really good time to ensure that you have those transparent and that people see them so that they can say, oh yeah, that's how we make decisions in this group, and they can live into that. 2 more. We recommend that you keep great notes and keep them visible. There was a meeting I was facilitating this week. We have an advisory board for a local network. So white women leaders are getting together to work on equity issues, and we have a Women of Color advisory board. And if we would have met in person with that Women of Color advisory board, we would have probably just talked about the agenda. But what the virtual medium allowed us to do is I pulled up the document and they shared their thoughts and they saw how I was editing based on their guidance and their leadership. So we were reflecting after the meeting, like if we did this in person, we would have missed a lot of that concrete engagement where we had I may have had it just for me or just in my notebook, but having that open window of a Word document open and sharing and having a work session together really allowed us to keep our notes visible. Now that may not be what you do and it may not fit your board meeting, or it might. Maybe a new opportunity would be for the secretary, whoever is taking notes, to write some of those main things in front of people so they can see them. As some people are real auditory learners and some people are visual learners. So seeing that in front of them can really aid in the work of the board. And lastly, start the meeting with some kind of connector. Some way, even if you don't do this normally, some way, whether you call it a warm-up or an icebreaker, whether it's serious or whether it's silly, you have that choice, but allow people to connect. I'd like to pause there and see if, Mark, do you have anything else to add or dig into there?
I don't think so, just because we're kind of getting closer to our time. I know there's some ways you want to wrap this up. I have a hunch that most every organization, depending on who they are and who they serve and how they serve, would probably have one to three items that they would add that be unique to them that might not be applicable elsewhere, but it would just be so much a part of who they are. And it'd be very good for them to think about that also.
Thank you. So yes, let's go to the next slide. We are coming into the home stretch, 8 minutes to go. The last topic we wanted to talk about, even though it kind of gets the short shrift here, is managing stress and supporting each other. But I do believe we've infused that through. So one of the things, we probably will just have you chat this if you'd be willing to, but if you could, or use this maybe as a warm-up in your board meeting or with one of your staff team meetings. If you could go back to March 15, what advice would you give or share with yourself? So we may not jump into that right now. You may just think about that if you're on a walk or you're gardening. We've had a lot of joy in sharing that with each other. So I would like to focus on what some best practices are that we've seen. And of course, we can all Google this. I found, 9 weeks ago, everybody was talking about stress relief and losing weight and walking and, cleaning out all of our closets. And now we're all like, oh my goodness. So I think that one of the biggest things, and I'm also just going to chat some of the tips that Mark and I had pulled together. One of the biggest things is listen to yourself. Trust yourself. If you don't feel like cleaning out that closet tonight because you had a really tough day, don't clean out the closet. Give yourself some grace. If you feel like you need to walk, walk. But there are a lot of ways, and I just posted some of them here. But I'd like to take a moment. Mark, did I hear that you were going to jump in on something there?
I didn't know. I was
okay.
Just agreeing with you.
Okay, great. So I'd like to invite you as we're start to wind up here. There are some of the ideas here like mindfulness and deep breathing and exercising and laughter and inspiration. One of my friends created a vision board and she hadn't done that for years. This gave her some time to do that and she chose to. So I think sometimes stress management techniques can be a little bit preachy. However, trust yourself and trust your board and check in with your board in these ways. How are you doing? And I'm sure you're doing that with a lot of those folks that you serve and with your donors and in those relationships. And don't forget to do it with your board too.
One of the things I've seen happen now a couple of times is when boards are together, they've had maybe something that they were already doing. Maybe they had a bowl of popcorn or they had some, little squeeze balls, little toys or whatever. But just to actually mail ahead of time, everybody, one of those little touch points. It's a little bit of a monetary investment. And I know everybody's tight right now. However, it is, again, an anchoring thing that we're doing this together. We all are holding the same thing. We're all wearing the same color. We all have our bling bling on from our nonprofit organization. We're all wearing the hat, whatever it might be. Something that, again, anchors you can also be a way to manage the stress.
Awesome. So let's go to the next slide. This is our closing slide. And we're going to ask for your participation in the chat window again as we close out strong. So if you would please share with us one aha in the chat window, one challenging concept, or one thing you'd like to learn more about. So either an aha that you had that you're gonna use, or a challenging thing you want to investigate, maybe put more time into, or more learning, or more support into something. We'll pause a minute or two as you share those.
These are great.
Okay, just a couple more seconds to have folks share. Okay, I love these. These are so encouraging. Someone shared that, okay, let's run through just a couple of them verbally real quick. It's true, the energy draining of having to focus in a virtual setting is real, it's different. Stuart recommends Zoom, better than other tools. Aranzata said, loved how you had us introduce ourselves. And Amanda said, taking a break between meetings instead of scheduling them back to back. And Nora shared that she's reminded to be purposeful to ensure the personality of the group is elevated and not lost during meetings. I love that word, elevated, even more necessary than when we're in person. And John, I work to make sure everyone's comfortable with the technology beforehand. All right. So we are going to move into closing. Let's go to the last slide, please. So the biggest thing is heartfelt thanks to each of you for being a part of this. It's been a real honor for both of us, both Mark, who's there in Idaho, just north, right, Mark, of Boise?
That's what we'll call it. It's
We'll
kind of
call
just
it
over the hills. Yeah.
Over the hills. Okay, great. It's been a real honor all the way from Michigan to join you today and to participate with you. I would love to hear from you. I've reserved time in my schedule for those of you that attended today for a complimentary meeting. If you would like to chat, talk through any of these topics, run through any problem solving, I'm here as a thought partner for you. So it's really great to have spent this time with you. Mark, any closing words?
I'll simply add that the website for Design Group International is a searchable site. This is a group that really puts content together and posts their findings and learnings and insights. And it's just a great resource to go to and say, okay, I'm looking for something. Has anybody done anything on this? Search for it. The search things at the bottom, you're sure to find something. And we'd be very, very happy to keep that conversation going. I hope you'll reach out to Deanna.
Great. Thanks so much, everybody. Be safe.
Thank you,
everybody,
Deanna
for
and
your
Mark.
time.
Bye-bye.
You're welcome.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Bye.